Well, my feelings are hurt a little bit because I saw that look you made when you didn't get to go. They'll save some cupcakes. They better save some cupcakes. I'll tell you what. My wife wants a ride home. Well, she's in here. She better have that worked out where I still get a cupcake too. All right, well, good morning once again. I'm going to quit talking before I end up in a whole bunch of trouble. It's certainly good to be with you this morning. If you got your Bibles, I want to encourage you to go ahead and turn to James chapter 3 with me this morning. James chapter 3. Now, if you were paying close attention as we've been going throughout this book, you'll say, well, wait a minute, we didn't finish James chapter 2. Before you start rioting and throwing anything, we're going to finish on the second half of James chapter 2 to close out the study. So we're going to come back to that, and if you're familiar with James, then you know exactly where we're going with that when the appropriate time comes. So we will get to that. Now, I told you very early on in the study of James that James and Proverbs are really about the same type book. In fact, James is the Proverbs of the New Testament. It's wisdom literature for study. It's the reflection in the mirror that you look at to show you who you should be versus who you really are. That's what the book of James does. Now, they have a lot of similarities between the two of them. For instance, they both speak about a device that you have within your being that causes the absolute most trouble in the world. It is within your being. Now, I'm willing to guess that if I asked you, and you were willing to be honest, what has caused you the most trouble in your life, the answers would match. Now, I'm going to go ahead and warn you that Shelley's already hit it. I can appreciate that. I will warn you that some of you may not like the message today. You'll understand why as we go, because it's going to speak directly to you. In fact, when I was putting it together, it was speaking pretty well to me, and no one is excluded from this. Our topic this morning is taming the tongue. And it's funny, this sounds almost innocent, but I guarantee you it's not. What is taming the tongue? What does it mean to tame something? Well, if you actually look up the definition, it is a process by which a wild beast is subdued into adapting and submitting to human control. Which beast do you think is the hardest in the world to tame? If you were just going to guess, with elephants, whales, I mean, these are things that we've seen be tamed. Lions, you got people that'll put their head in the lion's mouth. I'm not, but people will do that. The Bible says the hardest thing to tame is not an animal at all, it is your tongue. Now, you think about that. You think about how many marriages are destroyed because people don't know when to stop talking. Or they don't talk enough in some cases. Women don't even have to speak. I love my wife. She doesn't have to open her mouth. I know what she's thinking by her facial expressions. Women don't have to say it. They show it in their expression. And men are like, yeah, preach on, but we're just as bad. Except we don't have the filter to not say it. We think it, we say it. We can't. It's like we have no control over it. We just say it. Whatever's on our mind. So we have our own problems. But you think about how many kids will never succeed in life because all they ever heard was negative things their entire period of growing up. A positive word was not spoken to them a single time. There was no encouragement. There was no uplifting to it whatsoever. It was only ever negative, and we wonder why they are who they are when they get older. You've got employees that are told at work that you stink at your job. That's all you hear is you stink at what you do. And then the bosses are surprised when there's no desire for that employee to get better at what they do. Why would they? All of this comes from a little red muscle that you have in your mouth that causes the most trouble in all of this world. In fact, just so you know how serious this is, I don't want you to think that I'm just trying to exaggerate, I'm trying to embellish. I want you to see how serious this is. Solomon, King Solomon, wisest man that has ever lived, God blessed him with wisdom, wrote in Proverbs 18 verse 21 that death and life are in the power of your tongue. And those who live it will eat its fruit. Now you read that and you realize that that's following verse 7 that he said just 14 verses earlier, where a fool's mouth is his destruction and his lips are a snare for his soul. 14 verses later you get to this: death and life are in the power of the tongue. Listen, these are not playful words being described here. Your words, every single word you speak has the power to bring about life or death. I hope you understand that. What you say either to someone or, unfortunately, the society we're in now, behind their backs or about them. Now it's social media, it's these chat groups that people are in. All of these things can have a rippling effect. We've seen it in the news. Do you know how heartbreaking it is to watch a news article about some kid that committed suicide because he was bullied in school? Because some parents didn't tell that kid, your words have consequences. Your words speak life or death, and they kept on berating this next kid that finally killed himself because he couldn't take it anymore. That's the power of words. They mean something. Now, this is such a powerful topic that in chapter 3, James is going to spend the whole first half of this chapter going through how important it is on the words that we say. So if you're in James chapter 3, begin reading with me here in verse 1. Verse 1 says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body, and it sets on fire the course of nature, and in it set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh." If you are a Christian, this is even more important for you to understand today. Your faith is going to be seen in what you do. Remember, this is the whole reason we're studying James right now, is that if you live by this description of yourself as a Christian, the call is to prove your faith. Show it. It should be evident. You say, well, I don't have to show. The Bible says you should. You shouldn't have to be told to show your faith. That's seen and evident of your actions, but guess what? Your faith is also displayed in how you speak. If it wasn't sad, it would almost be hilarious that in the industry in which I work, bad language is just pretty common. My industry crosses with Justin's industry a lot. That's common language you hear, just cussing nonstop. I mean, it gets to be kind of irritating. But it's almost funny. You let the same guy that I've been working with cussing up a storm here, that I'm a preacher, and all of a sudden he's the greatest Christian you've ever met in your life. He's speaking things like he's holy and like he understands it. All of these things, he's professing his faith as a Christian because now he's heard that I'm a preacher. Jesus said in Matthew 12, verse 34, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. What is a heart that sounds like this? That sounds like this cussing fool, that sounds like a sinful world. What does that message say for a person that then says, oh, I'm a Christian? Now, the odds are better than not. I just described somebody in this room. In James chapter 3, he lays out 2 points. Believe it or not, this section is actually pretty easy to preach. He lays it out perfectly for you. He gives 2 points and even some illustrations to go along with it. But he lays out these 2 points, the power of the tongue and the problem with the tongue. And they're both pretty simple topics to grasp if you're honest with yourself. That's what this comes down to. But you begin by looking at verse 1, and verse 1 almost seems out of place, because why would a chapter about bridling the tongue have anything to do with being a teacher? It seems almost out of place, but it's not. See, the tongue has power to direct others. You see, in that day, Christians, they would meet in synagogues and they would meet in houses to study and to talk about God's Word. And they didn't have what you're used to having for church service. You're used to coming in one building, somebody's going to lead singing, you're used to having one preacher that's always speaking. That's not what it was for them. That's not how it was. Sure, you had some you had Timothy was an evangelist, you had pockets like that. But that wasn't the case everywhere you went. And so they kind of had almost traits of what Jewish worship was like, that they were just kind of used to doing, that it was open forum. If you had a message, you could get up and you could speak. You were allowed to do that. If you had a lesson, you could address the congregation and they would normally do it. But here's a shocker for you. Everyone wanted to be a teacher. Nobody wanted to be a student. Nobody wanted to listen and learn. Everybody wanted to speak because standing in front of everybody is prestigious. That's where you get honor, is being in front of people. And so James is addressing these people first off by saying that if you want to get up and talk and teach, and you're basically there to hear yourself talk, you need to just sit down and be quiet. You don't even need to go about it. He says, because let not many of you become teachers, because you will receive a stricter judgment. Why? Because you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You're doing it to hear yourself speak. You're doing it for your own glory. Now listen, this isn't something I take lightly. None of you should when it comes to being a teacher of God's Word. If you lead someone astray, you will answer for that. If you teach for your own glory, you will answer for that. In fact, James says there is a stricter condemnation coming for those that do that. And the word that he uses there in the Greek is the word for karma. Or other translations like New King James says judgment. But do you want to know what the hardest area with teaching is? It's the hypocrites. The ones that's easy to say and hard to do. You don't practice what you preach. You know, people think it's easy. I'm a preacher. I have it down, right? I've got this down. I live it. You should follow me, and I would call you the biggest fool in this room if you said that. See, listen to what James says in the next verse. Verse 2, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man. So we all get tripped up. What this verse is describing is the universality of sin. You're going to sin. I'm going to sin. Not a single person in this room is not going to struggle with sin. It hits us all differently, but the same result comes out of it. You sinned. And so he says, in fact, if you don't stumble, if you don't deal with this, well, then you're perfect. But let me ask you this. Is anyone in here perfect today? Well, only Jesus Christ can make that claim that he's perfect. Don't think I didn't see you smiling back there. Only Jesus can make that claim that he's perfect. He never said the wrong thing. He never did the wrong thing. 1 Peter 2 verse 22 makes that claim that not an evil word came out of his mouth. He was perfect. But I want you to notice this, what James is really saying. Because if he says perfect, well, the benchmark is gone and you can't even hit it anyways. That word there for perfect, and write this down in your Bible, is teleos. Don't write that down. But it means mature. This is describing maturity. Some translations will even use the word maturity here instead. It's describing someone that's full grown, someone that's full of age. And he makes this point basically that really summarizes this entire section here, that if one is mature, if you are a full-grown, mature Christian, then you should know how to bridle your tongue. You should know how to have your tongue in subject to your body. That is the mark, that is the measuring stick of perfection as James describes for a Christian. But it just knocked the majority of us, me included, out of contention there. Now, you're in good company if that's you. If you just got knocked out of that, you are in good company because the prophets had the same problem. The apostles had the same problem. You know, Peter is described as the apostle that had the foot and mouth disease because he was always putting his foot in his mouth. He was speaking sometimes without thinking. This is a universal problem that we all struggle with except for one. Except for Jesus Christ. And so to show the power of the tongue, he gives us some illustrations. It's not enough for me to say it. He wants you to see it. And so in verse 3, he says, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and they turn the whole body. Now you look at a picture like what's on the screen right now. You see how big that animal is standing next to that fairly small woman. And it puts it into perspective. That horse could destroy that woman if it wanted to. Which is in part why I'm not a horse person. Me and a horse, we kind of look at each other and just say we're not for each other. And so I don't have anything to do with it. No problem with anybody that does. I'm not a horse person. But you put that bit in the horse's mouth and all of a sudden that horse becomes obedient to the commands that are given. It'll turn left, you want to turn left, turn right, all by that little bit in its mouth. Not only that, he talks about ships, verse 4. Look also at these ships, although they are so large, they are driven by fierce winds and turned by a small rudder wherever the pilot desires. These are massive ships. I would like to know the ship that's in the picture, how much that thing weighs. And it's turned by that little bitty rudder in the back. Whatever direction the pilot desires it to go, it will go by turning that little bitty plate. That massive ship is going to turn. Just a small little plate. And what James is trying to get you to understand is exactly what he says in verse 5, that the tongue is a little member, but it boasts great big things. All of this power is completely out of proportion with the body to which it's associated with. It's a little bit in a huge horse. It's a small rudder in a huge ship. It's a small tongue and an unbelievable amount of power that you carry for life or for death within that little member in your body. It's no wonder why Solomon said what he said about it. But the final illustration he gives so that you can see how serious this is, the tongue is compared to a wildfire. Now, have you watched the news, especially those out west, and seen what a wildfire looks like? The devastation of it? I remember watching this coverage from 2016 of Gatlinburg. And it's incredible to see what it was able to do. Do you know how that fire began? Some kids were playing with matches. That fire, that big, that destroyed that much land, began with something so small that you have in your house that you don't think twice about, but it did that. Something that small can do something that big. What message do you think James is trying to get you to understand? This isn't hard to grasp. He said that the tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body. But listen to what he says. And sets on fire the course of nature that is set on fire by hell. The word for hell in this passage is the word for Gehenna, which Gehenna comes from the valley of Hinnom, which is where Moloch would be worshipped. He was the fire god. He would be worshipped in that area. And later on, this valley of Hinnom would become the trash dump for the Jews. And they would pile their trash there and it'd be lit on fire. It was always burning, this nasty place. And it became translated Gehenna, which we think of as hell. That's the word we get for hell. It is a nasty, disgusting place. And what James is saying basically is your tongue is like the fires of hell if it's used for evil. If your tongue is used for lying, if it's used for deceit, and by the way, if you hadn't got this, when I say tongue, it's your speech. If you haven't gotten that. But if your speech is used for lying and for deceit, for malice, for hate, for gossip, for backstabbing others, then James says your tongue is like the fires of hell. This is very vivid imagery you're getting here. That's the power this little thing has. Powerful enough to destroy the whole body, he says. So finally, let's look at the problem associated with the tongue. Based on what we've discussed so far, the problem should be pretty obvious. But verse 8 says the tongue is untamable. No man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Well, that's not my tongue we're talking about. Now, how many of you have thought that so far that I'm glad I don't have this problem. I'm glad I don't talk like this. This is my neighbor does this. My coworker does this, but it's not me. Yes, it is. You hear that and you think, well, if the tongue is untamable, then what's the point? How can I tame what can't be tamed? You got these great big these elephants, these whales, all of these things can be tamed. In fact, in verse 7, James lists out all of these types of beasts, mirroring what the Genesis account says in Genesis 1:28. In the same order, the beast of creation, he says they are tamed. Now, is Adam some kind of great tamer? That he could tame every beast of the world? I'm going to give you the answer. No. It was God. He couldn't have done it had God not given him dominion over all of these things. God did that. And so the simple answer, you say, well, how can I tame what can't be tamed? You can't. You on your own, apart from God, can't. And what God expects is through your faith in Him that you will have dominion over your tongue so that you have dominion over your body. God has given you everything you need to be able to do it. You just have to go do it. See, without that, you'll never have control over your body or your tongue. James then gives us the last example in this passage to show how big this problem that we face is. And he's going to address the fact that our tongues, even as Christians, remember, who is this letter written to? He's not writing to pagans. He's not writing to people that aren't, he's writing to Christians. And he says, the problem with this is your tongues are inconsistent. My tongue is inconsistent. So then you read verse 9, with it, with your tongue, with your mouth, with your speech, we bless God we bless God our Father, and then we curse men who are made in the image of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessings and cursings. He says, my brethren, these things ought not be so. Now, if you have a sincere heart, if you're honest, that should have hit you right between the eyes. Because every one of us in here are guilty of this in some form or another. I'm probably the chiefest of them here doing this. And I admit that wholeheartedly. The same tongue that comes to church, whatever church it is, on Sunday and praises God and glorifies God and talks about our Christianity so loudly and proudly, call people brothers and sisters, and hey, I hope you have a great week, brother, and you do all of these things, will cuss you out if you get in front of them in traffic. Let someone honk at you on the highway and you'll start talking in tongues. The same tongue that blesses God curses man made in God's image. He says, brothers, that ought not be so. These things are completely inconsistent with each other. You pray to God one minute, you curse somebody out the next. And I've watched this, and I've even seen examples of this in my two own kids. How they'll come up and they'll love on me, and they're just loving on their daddy, and they're fighting with each other, hating each other. You can't do that. That's a bigger representation of our faith to God. That we love the Father, but we hate our brother. He says you can't do that. That is inconsistent in your worship to God. So James is going to ask a couple of rhetorical questions. He's not expecting an answer because the answer is obvious. Can fresh water and salt water come from the same stream? If you don't know the answer to that, it's no. They cannot come from the same stream. Can a fig tree bear olives? No. What do you think a fig tree is going to bear? It's going to bear figs. An olive tree, what do you think it's going to bring? It's going to bring olives. Then what in the world are you doing confessing with your lips that you are a Christian and sounding like the sinful world around you? You look like it, you sound like it, you act like it, like all these people that couldn't care less about God. Except on Sundays. Except on Sundays. Your tongue will tell who you really are. The fruit of your lips finds its roots in your heart. You want to test this theory? I'm going to give you a test to try this week. You don't have to do it. The results are yours. I don't want to hear about it. The results are yours. Tell somebody that you interact with a lot that you're a Christian this week. Profess your faith to them and see what their response is. See if they say, oh yeah, I knew that. So they go, really? Oh, I didn't know that. I would have never guessed that. See if they had any idea. Like I said, these results are yours. I don't want to hear how it goes. But try that. Try it and just see what the results of that are. So in closing this morning, I want to leave you with one final passage and you'll be done hearing me speak. If what James says doesn't bother you too much, what Jesus said ought to stop you in your tracks. Matthew chapter 12, verse 36 and 37, Jesus Christ speaking, But I say to you that for every idle word that man may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. That is not James. That is not some man. That is God in flesh. So that by your words you will either be justified, or by your words you will be condemned. That means that on the day of judgment, you're going to kneel before the throne of God. You will kneel before the throne of God, and you will give an account for every single word that you said. Words that justified, words that uplifted, words that encouraged, words of truth, words of life. But also every idle word that you said. Every evil word, every time you talked down about someone, every time you talked about someone, every time you worried to death about something that was not your business. Every time you gossiped, you will answer for that. Now that is horrifying to think about when you think about all the things you've said. All the gossip, the lies. That's a terrifying thought. At least it was for me. And we could say amen and go home and you're like, well, this is just kind of sad. This isn't very encouraging and uplifting. The blessing that we have today that's freely offered to every single person is that you can be cleansed of those sins. That attitude, that sinful way of living is a sin. And you can be cleansed of your sins. You can either face that judgment day stained in the sin of the evilness of your mouth, or cleansed and made clean in the blood of Christ. Do you want to face judgment with deceitful lips or with honest praising lips? Now the only question I've got for you, I'm not going to go through some big long invitation. I'm only going to ask you this. I just want to know, will you be honest with yourself? See, we're going to have an invitation song here in just a moment. Brother Melvin's going to lead us in an invitation song. And if we're honest with ourselves, I want you to see this. And I've kind of witnessed this my entire life. If people were honest with themselves about how their week had gone, when the invitation was given, these front pews would be absolutely full. If people were honest with themselves. But many will kind of wash it over like it's no big deal. James reiterates what Solomon already wrote, that your words speak life or death, and you will give an account for every one of them. So finally this morning, are you in fellowship with God today? Your actions, your speech, are they all to the glory of God? If the answer is no, then I want to encourage you to get right with the Lord while you've had this blessed opportunity to do so, because that opportunity may not be here tomorrow. It may not be here next week. Here at the congregation, we would love to pray for you if you're in need of that, or if you're ready to make that first step. Salvation is one step away, and if we can help you with that here at the congregation, if you're ready to repent and be baptized, we would love to guide you in that if you have need, as Melton leads us in this invitation song.